I'm glad that we have this opportunity today to open up the Word together. You know, I was watching a little mini-series on television, and the scene opened up with a kitchen scene, someone cooking in the kitchen. And the camera began to zoom in on various objects that were in the kitchen, a frying pan with oil on it, a photo on a corner, just backing off and seeing all kinds of vegetables and stuff on a counter. And the camera just panned long enough just so that you can at least register all of these items. And then without any warning, the scene changed entirely, and you were transported to another time, another place. And it came stamped with a time reference, but it wasn't long before you completely forgot about that opening scene. And now you're into the rest of this programming. But to the observant among us, there was enough detail now in that opening scene to give you a hint as to what was going to unfold. Not too much, but enough so that after you watch the show, you could go back and go, oh, I see where this was going. And subliminally, it had given you all of these little hints. I think that the passage that we're going to look at today can do that for you and for me. The passage begins to bring a fuller understanding of what was alluded to in the very beginning of this Gospel of Matthew. In fact, you may not remember this, but if you go back to Matthew chapter 1, here we have the greatest tease beginning with this opening line. It says, "This is a record of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham." That one line, to the informed, right, would have been reason to reread that line and wonder what this was all about. To those who were informed about their faith, they would have immediately picked up on Jesus being called the Messiah, that the promises that God had made in ancient Israel to the likes of Abraham and to King David are now being referenced all in the person of Jesus. Now, to the uninformed, it'd be a line that would be quickly forgotten, and we'd be carried along then by the stories of Jesus' teachings and his miracles. But now we're much further into this book, and the scenes have begun to pile on one after the other, and now we're at a place where it's going to bring us back to this very opening line. And I wonder if we've learned something along the journey. Well, let's find out, because this is all going to be about a question of identity. In Matthew chapter 16, verse 13, it says this: "When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, 'Who do people say the Son of Man is?'" Now, to give us a frame of reference, I'm going to put a little map up on the screen. This map we've seen before, that salmon color, it's the region of Judea, where Jerusalem is. It's alongside the Dead Sea, as you can see on the bottom right of your screen. The more purple colors are also territories that were divided up between the sons of King Herod. King Herod, the father who would send a battalion of Roman soldiers to Bethlehem to search out for this one who was born king of the Jews, and wound up slaughtering the innocents, right? The children 2 years of age and younger. So now his sons are taking over this territory. Salmon colored, and then the more purple colored is Herod Antipas, and the brown color up on the top right is Philip. Well, Philip, in order to just bring in good feelings between him and Caesar Augustus, he renamed the town and placed his palace there, and it was called Caesarea Philippi. On the map, you could see it's about 25 miles north of the Sea of Galilee. This whole region is one in which Jesus has spent a lot of time teaching and performing many of his miracles. And now he's up north at Caesarea Philippi, and there he is beginning to sit down and question his disciples regarding this question, who do people say that I am? Now, why would he ask that question? Jesus is very self-aware. You never get a glimpse in the scriptures where Jesus is not fully understanding, cognizant of who he is and the role that he has come to play. In fact, if you go all the way back to Matthew chapter 5 and verses 17 and 18, there's a passage there where Jesus says, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law." He says, on the contrary, I have not come to abolish it, but to fulfill it. He says, I tell you the truth, not the least stroke of a pen or the smallest letter in the alphabet is going to be taken away until all has been accomplished. So Jesus now is looking at this word of God that is informing us something about God's will, God's ways, about who we are, the world in which we're living, this world that is to come. Jesus is aware of the role that he is playing. And he is beginning to tease that out, not only with the words that he's using in his teaching, but also he's going to demonstrate that in his actions. So again, why is Jesus asking this question? It's certainly not for himself, but it's for the disciples. And think about it. So much has been shared about who this Jesus is. You got those who are convinced, who've experienced something of the power of Jesus in their life. And think about all of the news that they begin to spread around. The leper that was healed, the lame man who was able to walk, the blind receiving sight, right? All of these, those who were fed, from the loaves and the fish, like you could see how this word about Jesus is just beginning to spread all around. And everybody has their impressions about who he is. And those are the people who love Jesus. Then you got those who were maybe curious, but then as we saw, there's a whole group that are growing in number, especially among the spiritual leaders of that day, who found Jesus to be a threat to their own position, and they are very combative. And they are now, at this stage in the unfolding of Matthew's story, finding a way to kill Jesus. All of which to say that the disciples have been in a position where they would have caught an earful from all the crowds that were around them. So what are these crowds saying about who Jesus is? And that's why Jesus asked them, who do people say that I am? Well, the text here in verse 14 goes on to say that they replied by saying, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. Now, it's very interesting of how the apostles are now responding to Jesus' question. And what I'd like to do is just give you a little bit more insight why this is so important. First of all, they mention that Jesus, some say that he might be John the Baptist. Why do they say that? Well, Jesus himself gives you a little bit of insight about this. So let's consider John the Baptist just for a moment through the eyes of Jesus. Jesus uses this text in Matthew chapter 11, verses 11 through 14. Jesus says, I tell you the truth, among those born of women, there has not arisen anyone greater than John the Baptist. Yet he who is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. You notice how Jesus has a way of always speaking about this kingdom of heaven with not terms of that question its existence, but with authority. He's saying those who are in the kingdom of heaven, he says, they are far, removed from even the greatness of John the Baptist here in this world. But notice what he says. He says, from the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven has been forcefully advancing, and forceful men lay hold of it. And so John the Baptist has come proclaiming a message of repentance, getting people ready for the coming of this Messiah. He played a pivotal role. In fact, many commentators would often refer to John as the last of the Old Testament prophets, the one who is looking forward and raising his voice saying, one is coming. That was John. And notice what he goes on to say. He says, for all the prophets and the law prophesied until John. See, so all that took place prior, what God is saying to Abraham, what God said to Moses, what God said, through David and all the kings and all the other prophets like Elijah, all of them, it says they've been prophesying. They have been foretelling something about God's will and his ways, getting people to come to a place where they would begin to understand a little bit more about this relationship that they had with the God who created all things. And they've been doing that until this day that John arrives. So people held John in high esteem. They saw him perhaps as this forerunner, one whose God's presence on his life was being felt. People were going to John. They were being baptized by John. And John was always referring them to the one who is yet to come. But notice in the text here it says, Jesus then goes on to say, if you are willing to accept it, he is the Elijah who was to come. Okay, we're talking about John the Baptist. But now Jesus says that this ministry of John the Baptist was really what was prophesied about Elijah. Well, what's that about? Well, let me take you to another text. Because remember, the people now are saying he's John the Baptist. Some were saying he's Elijah. Well, why would they say he's Elijah? Well, because the last book in the Old Testament, a book entitled Malachi, we read this verse. Here is a prophetic word that is given to the prophet Malachi, and it says, see, I will send you the prophet Elijah before that great and dreadful day of the Lord comes. So in the Old Testament, people were looking for this Messiah, right? This servant of the Lord that would come, and every generation was hoping that theirs would be the generation when the Messiah would come. Malachi is saying that this ministry of Elijah, the one who is out there proclaiming, make straight paths for him, right? To prepare people for the coming of the Messiah, they're waiting for that to happen. So it's understandable that people would consider the fact that Jesus might be this Elijah. Why? Because Jesus is going out proclaiming the good news of the kingdom of heaven. They're saying, well, maybe he's the Elijah. And then some would say, no, maybe he's John the Baptist, because they're seeing in John the one who is fulfilling this kind of ministry. So you can see how people are having all kinds of thoughts regarding who Jesus is. But then the text goes on and speaks about Jeremiah. And Jeremiah, why Jeremiah? Well, what you need to know about Jeremiah is Jeremiah was a prophet, a Jewish prophet who lived around 650 BC, right up until around the year 570. And why do I give you these numbers? Because that was about the time that Israel would be taken captive and exiled for over 70 years. So what you find is Jeremiah was a prophet who came warning people to repent. That you might have a passage of scripture that you might use as a bookmark, or some of you might even have as a little magnet on your refrigerators. It's that famous text that says, I know the plans I have for you, not to harm you, but to prosper you, to give you a hope and a future. That was Jeremiah Jeremiah 29:11 to be precise. And that promise was given to the Israelites before they were going to be carried off into captivity. God didn't want them to be so overwhelmed that they would think that somehow or another God had forgotten them. But at the same time, God, who is holy and God, who is just, has been speaking into the hearts of the people to get them to a place where they would repent, and they refused. And God is not a respecter of persons. It's not like he says, oh, well, you guys you're part of, my chosen people, so I'm going to look the other way. No, God is not a bad parent. God is going to hold them to the same standards, in fact, more so than those around him. A little sidelight, that's what the Apostle Peter will tell us when he says that judgment begins with the household of God. Before the judgment is going to come on the world around us, it's going to begin with those on the inside because we should know better. So some people would look at Jeremiah as this prophet who was out there proclaiming this call to repentance. And remember, when Jesus started his ministry, how did he start that ministry? All the way back in Matthew chapter 4. Do you remember? He moves from Nazareth to Capernaum, and what's the first words out of his mouth? Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is near. So everyone is sitting around, and they say, wow, maybe he's John the Baptist. Maybe he's come to fulfill the ministry of Elijah. Maybe he's Jeremiah. And then it says, or one of the prophets. Why would they speak of the prophets that way? Why would some draw a conclusion that maybe Jesus is just one of the prophets? Well, there's an interesting passage that goes all the way back to the days of Moses. People, they were beginning to see that Jesus may be this great prophet, a figure that had not only this divine commission, but was playing great significance in that time and in that day. So they're beginning to see the crowds form around Jesus. They're seeing this power being manifested in him, and they think he could be a prophet. Maybe he's the prophet. And by that, I want you to look at this passage here in Deuteronomy 18, verse 18. This was a word that was given to Moses. And God is telling Moses, he says, I will raise up for them a prophet like you. Meaning Moses was the one who was leading his people out of Egypt into a promised land. Now God says, a day will come when I will raise up a prophet like you from among your brothers. And I will put my words in his mouth, and he will tell them everything I command him. Back in the day, people looked at that kind of a reference, and they thought, wow, surely this is the Messiah that God would send, this great deliverer. So throughout the generations, there's always this promise that God is going to come and set all things right, and he would send his servant to initiate all this process. So now you could see, right, all these things that we've been studying over these weeks. What they're doing is building up this sense of anticipation about who is this Jesus. They hear him teach, they see his miracles, and now everybody's drawing their conclusions. John the Baptist, Elijah, Jeremiah, the prophet. See, all of these were signs that there was something special about Jesus, right? That people were highly honoring him. But I want you to think about this. Is Jesus claiming to be a prophet? Is what Jesus doing just on the same par of an Elijah or a Jeremiah? No, this Jesus is speaking as God. Jesus is doing things that only God can do. Manipulate creation so that he could walk on water, or he takes 5 loaves and feeds fishes, or gives a man born blind sight. Who does that? Only God. So the people, they are thinking they're giving praise to this Jesus by elevating him in his status and lumping him along with all of these great leaders. But Jesus is much more than that. And that's why I think then Jesus turns to them and says, well, what about you? In verse 15, he says, what about you? Who do you say that I am? And now it's showtime. Now it's time to show Jesus whether or not you have truly been understanding what he has been saying. You recall, for those of you who have been following along in this study, that this is always about understanding. Jesus doesn't want them to miss the opportunity of seeing him for who he is. He wants them to gain this understanding so that their faith will be built on a solid rock, so that they would not only hear this word from God, but they would also begin to put it into practice because they are confident and assured that Jesus is who he says he is. And now he's asking them, okay, I'm hearing what the other people say, but you've been with me now for a while. Who do you say that I am? And in verse 16, here we find Peter's response. It says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Peter, it appears that he speaks for the group. Usually he's referred to as Peter or Simon, but here it's almost like you ever get in trouble with your parents and they call you by your full name, right? All the, you know, your first name, your middle name, it all comes together, right? You know you're in trouble. Here Matthew writes, Simon Peter. He answers, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. Peter begins to put into words what the disciples have been feeling for a little bit of time now. Why do I say that? Because, again, can we just go back a short time ago? After Jesus fed the 5,000, he gets into a boat, sends the disciples on their way, and then he comes to them walking on water. They see him at a distance and think it's an apparition, right? Some kind of ghost. And when Jesus tells them not to be afraid, that it is, he says, it is I, Jesus, right? Peter responds by saying, Lord, call to me so I could come out on this water. And Peter actually gets out of the boat. People make fun of Peter because he winds up sinking, right? But not at first. And he had faith enough to get out of that boat. And now he walks towards Jesus. And yes, he looks around and he begins to doubt and he begins to sink, and Jesus grabs him, brings he and Peter back into the boat. And all of the disciples are sitting around, and it says that they were amazed and they were murmuring amongst themselves, surely this is the Son of God. So now Peter is giving full voice. You want to know who we think you are, Jesus? You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. What does that Messiah really mean? In the first century, the Messiah was being viewed as some human deliverer, someone that God was going to raise up from among their own brothers. It's like that prophecy that I just read to you from Deuteronomy 18:18, where he says, I'm going to raise up a prophet from among your own brothers, and I will put my words in his mouth. They're looking for a deliverer of that kind of origin. They would think that if he's going to come from his brothers, then he has to fulfill some of those Old Testament prophetic words, like the word that God gave to David, where he says that to David, notice this in 2 Samuel chapter 7, there's a passage there, and it says, when your days are over and you rest with your fathers, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, David, who will come from your own body. I will establish his kingdom. He is the one who will build a house for my name. I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be his father, and he will be my son. And then he goes on to say, your house, David, and your kingdom will endure forever before me. Your throne will be established forever. See, that was the understanding of the Jew. Those who understood these scriptures knew that the promise that God made, that God was about to fulfill, would come through this line, not only of Abraham, but it would come through the line of David. That's why in those early texts that we just read, right, in the opening of the book, when it says, here is the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham, it is a clue that Jesus is about to be the one who is fulfilling all of these promises. And so they are seeing now in this Jesus, the one who they think now is going to restore all things. That this kingdom that he's coming to establish that will endure forever is now on the cusp. It's all going to change now. His throne is going to be established forever. He's the Son of the living God. Glory, success, redemption, all of these things wrapped up around their perception of who Jesus is. And they do well. But as we will discover, they don't have the full picture of this ministry of the Messiah. Because while it is true that the Messiah is going to come and restore all things, it was going to come in stages. And this first stage would require that God's servant, his own son, who he loved and sent into the world, that those who believe on him would not perish but have everlasting life. Jesus would give his life a ransom for your sins and mine. And what's the result of that? People are going to witness him being beaten, crucified, dead, buried. But as he will tell them, on the third day he will rise again. This one climatic figure is the one in whom God's purposes will finally be accomplished. They're going to learn more about this as we continue through this Gospel of Matthew. But for now, they have drawn the conclusion that Jesus is this promised Messiah. All right, so let's bring all of this together. The disciples have been schooled by Jesus, right? They have heard his teaching. They have witnessed his miracles. They have been given this upfront seat to the unfolding of the good news of the kingdom of heaven as it has been revealed in this Messiah, Jesus. This unfolding came with moments of great awe, but also with some disappointment, because they saw how some rejoiced at Jesus' coming, embraced him quickly, and they, from all segments of society, right? Roman centurions, leaders in the Sanhedrin, the ruling council of the Jews, Gentile, women, all of them coming and embracing Jesus. However, not all who heard those words or witnessed the miracles were quick to respond. Some, as we've observed, have rejected and rebelled against him. So the 12, now they've been treated to a running commentary on this life of Jesus. And when I look at these passages here, it was always about Jesus beginning to disclose to you and to me more and more about who he is. Sometimes it left them stunned, like when he hushed the wind and he calmed the sea. Sometimes they were confused, wondering what all this really meant. And then there were times when they were very reflective, trying to capture the import of the moment. You know, when I was reading this passage, I thought for a moment, I said, you know, in this life, we also learn the same way, don't we? There are circumstances that unfold in our daily life that can leave us stunned or confused or reflective. You hope that the cumulative effect of these various life experiences is what God uses to correct us and to train us, to mature us. It's in those moments that sometimes we see ourselves in a different light. We come to different conclusions. God, He allows this light of His word to begin to just shine, and something happens inside of us, and we're drawn. Just like Peter and those disciples, when they first were with Jesus, they were very confused. And now here they are in this group. And when Jesus says, "Who do you say that I am?" His response is, "You are the Messiah." Now that's not perfect knowledge. There's a lot of things that we know Peter's going to have to contend with. But in that moment, they crossed that line. And so I think, isn't that how it also happens for us? Those disciples were given a crash course in theology. There were sometimes where things just went over their heads. Some things were partially digested. Some things just awakened their hearts and their minds to really grasp the glory of God in Jesus. And that's the same for you and for me. There are going to be some days that you live out your life and it becomes so clear to you that God's way is true. And then let some obstacles get in the way, some encumbrances, some trials. And now you're at this juncture and you could hear the voice of the Spirit inside saying, okay, who do you think He is? And in those moments, you're going to draw near and you're going to embrace Him. Have you ever discovered that in life there are some experiences that you have that just stick with you for the rest of your life? There is some circumstance, something that happens, the way somebody says something, or a particular moment in your life that just registers and it is stamped for the rest of your life. You just can't shake it. Sometimes that could be for bad, and sometimes it could be something very good. You know what? In closing, I'd like to think that there was this one moment for these disciples when the pieces began to fall into place for them. It's a time when Jesus had been engaged in all of this ministry. People were responding, but in the midst of that, there was this rising opposition. How would Jesus deal with that opposition? Well, here in Matthew 11, it says this. Jesus would lift His eyes to heaven and He would pray, and He says, I praise You, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because You have hidden these things from the wise and learned and revealed them to these little children. Yes, Father, for this was Your good pleasure. The mixed responses didn't cause Jesus to doubt His Father's will. In fact, what He saw that the Father was revealing truth to those that people thought were on the outside. And those who were wise and learned, they were getting tripped up by their own presuppositions. And Jesus looks to the heavens and says, Father, I thank You that You've revealed these truths to these children. And then it says that He turned to His disciples and He says, all things have been committed to Me by My Father, which makes Jesus the Son of the living God. He looks at his disciples and says, all things have been committed to me by my Father. No one knows the Son except the Father. No one knows the Father except the Son, and those to whom the Son chooses to reveal him. Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Learn of me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. I think that's one of those moments in Peter's life that just stuck down deep inside. And now when Jesus says to him, who do you say I am? Peter puts all those pieces together and responds, you are the Christ. You are the Messiah. You are the Son of the living God. And Jesus will demonstrate, as we'll see in the unfolding of this gospel, that they needed to grow in that understanding. But they crossed the line. My hope is that the unfolding of God's word is helping you to put these pieces together, helping you to find in Jesus one who promises rest for your souls. I hope that these studies are helping you to see Jesus as this great Messiah, the Son of the living God, who loves you and calls you to take him by the hand and go from this life into the one to come. Let's pray. Father, I want to thank you so much for a revelation that speaks deeply into our heart. I also want to thank you, Lord, that what we see happening in the life of these disciples is just taking place within us. It's not this instant, sometimes recognition, but the hearing of the word, the reflecting on these passages, observing the world around us and all of its brokenness, and then trying to put all these things together. If our hearts are open, Lord, we will find you to be the Son of the living God who has come alongside us so that you would be the light unto our way, granting us peace that passes all understanding, placing your Spirit in us so that we would experience something of this love and joy that we will experience with you for eternity. Help us, Lord, to continue to cross that line of faith, and we'll be careful to give you all the praise in Jesus' name. Amen.